Good evening. Turn to Job chapter 3. We watched his pain and his loneliness as he went through the three different trials. But in chapter 3, we get to listen to it. Now, this is a soliloquy. He is not talking to... It's kind of interesting because his friends are sitting there probably close enough to listen to all this, and nobody comments to him or interjects. But the cycle of speeches that we're so familiar with is going to start in chapter 4. The trouble is, this is a dark chapter. I was thinking about this. Anybody know of anybody who thinks that Job chapter 3 is their favorite passage in the Bible? And do you know of anybody that's ever memorized a verse from Job chapter 3? And there's a good reason for it. I mean, this is, we'll see in a minute, but we're only going to get through the first 10 verses tonight. And maybe it's a good thing I'm going to visit my mom next week and we take a break so Lance can talk to you about something nice and sweet and uplifting next week, and then we'll be dark again the week after. It is. But it's an important chapter. Okay, so let's start with verse 1 and we'll read down through verse 10. After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, There is a man-child conceived. Let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let not joyful voice come therein. Let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day, because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for its honesty. Thank you for its applicability to our lives. And here is a man who is in the darkest of times, and he just pours it all out in thoughts to himself. And sometimes we wonder, how could such a righteous man seem to stoop so low? But you give us these snapshots, this picture of what we would call rock bottom, to emphasize that someone can sin not and can still retain their integrity. Thank you for the encouragement that comes from your word in the darkest of times. In Jesus' name, amen. Romans 12:15 says, Rejoice with those that do rejoice, and weep with those that weep. Job chapter 3 is a call to imagine yourself sitting beside or in close proximity to his three friends and listen to Job and weep with him as he weeps. Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 14 through 18 is also kind of rough to listen to, but it's one of those raw, real moments that God shares in Scripture to remind us that life sometimes is very tough. And so in Jeremiah chapter 20, verses 14 through 18, we read, Cursed be the day wherein I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought tidings to my father, saying, A man-child is born unto thee, making him very glad. And let that man be as the cities which the Lord overthrew and repented not. And let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noontime. Because he slew me not from the womb, or that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb to be always great with me. Wherefore came I forth out of the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame. Now, there was a time in Psalm 137 when the nation of Israel felt this way. And they very much pictured this. And it's after the host is taken off to Babylon, and they know. And even though they understand that it's punishment and they've been carried off to Babylon, it doesn't change the fact that dealing with the circumstances is tough. Psalm 137, starting in verse 1, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us joy. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Find themselves in a foreign land, and the enemy's like, well, why don't you sing for us, one of the songs that you used to sing back in Jerusalem? Well, it's a little hard considering the present circumstances. He died as soon as he'd been born. And then in the third part, why can't I just die? Because this is absolute misery. And it's easy sometimes to judge and to look at circumstances and say, well, wait a second, where's the man of faith? But it's important to realize the foundation. Remember, I told you for a couple of weeks that God's laying the foundation here of things that he wants us to remember as we go through the rest of the book. And as dark as chapter 3 is, it's important to realize that the silence is broken by Job. Some of the foundation that's been laid, we see this transition made into verse 2. And Job spoke and said. Remember in verse 121 and in chapter 2, verse 10, that he is a man of faith. His response, naked came I out of the womb, and maybe naked I'm going to leave this earth. Well, if that's the way it is, blessed be the name of the Lord. In chapter 2, verse 10, and all this, Job sinned not. And so you have to remember that even though we have this really raw reality that's going on here in chapter 3, it doesn't change the fact that Job is a righteous man. We also need to remember the testing. He's lost all his possessions. He's lost his adult children, his loved ones, and now he has lost his health. We need to remember that his friends had good intentions as we go through the rest of these chapters. But let's dig into it, the raw reality. This is poetry, okay? It's not prose. And so verse 1 makes a statement. Verse 2 backs up and says it again. And actually, in the Hebrew, it's one of the shortest verses in the Bible. And Job spake and said. Spake and said are the same verb. So literally, noun, verb. Double meaning verb. That's it. That's all you have. Job's going to say something. What is he going to say? Well, he's going to get real about life. In verses 3 through 9 particularly, he uses two words over and over again, let and may. In other words, in Hebrew, these are what you call wish verbs. We'd say, well, I wish Christmas would hurry up and get here, or I wish it wasn't so hot. Now, question, can you do anything about hurrying Christmas up? No. Can you do anything about changing how hot it is the next couple of days? No. You can wish the economy was better. You can wish, you can wish, you can wish. A wish verb is something that, boy, it sure would be better if, but there's not really a whole lot you can do about it. So keep that in mind as we plug through this chapter because it's very, very important. He is expressing very, very deep feelings of emotional anguish. And I like this chapter for that reason. And I don't like digging into all the harsh reality of it, but I like that here is a man who is saying the things that a lot of folks wish they could say but feel like they can't. I believe it's why it's included in the Bible. God is encouraging folks that in your darkest hour, remember that he wants good things for you, and he is working things together, and that comes to a conclusion at the end of the book. Not so easy to see in chapter 3. Here we are, Job is regretting his birth in verses 1 through 10. It's also important to remember, Satan said, if you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and you do this, he is going to curse you to his face. Did you read anywhere in verses 1 through 10 that Job is cursing God? No, he's not. Very careful distinction between that. He is cursing the day that he was born. He is regretting it, but he is not cursing God, which just leads us to the Hebrew word curse. He's not sitting on a dung heap, ripping off expletives, being filthy-mouthed about the day he was born. It's not what it means. It means to be light about, to bring it into contempt, to despise it. In other words, I feel like it had been better if I'd never been born. All right? Some important stuff that goes on here, starting in verse 3. His birthday, the day he was born. Let the day perish wherein I was born. And then he's going to talk about the night he was conceived. Hara is a different Hebrew word. It talks about literally to become pregnant rather than the first word to be born. And so he's talking about two separate occurrences here, and he's going to revisit them in more depth in the following verses. But he wishes he had not been born. Now, again, notice, he doesn't say he wishes he was aborted. And it doesn't say anywhere that he ever contemplated suicide. He is just looking at his situation and saying he is in such awful turmoil that he wished he was not conceived or born. He describes the moment of conception here in verse 3 and says, the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. He describes it as the beginning of a man-child. Boy, today we have lumps of tissue and we have cute little words like fetus and all kinds of other things that we want to dance around to destroy the fact that this is a human life. But one of the things that we learn, even though this is a dark chapter, is God is very much bringing out to us the fact that a man-child was going to be born. Life happened. Now think about it. When they figured out that they were expecting, what do you suppose their reaction was? Well, probably the same reaction as most couples, right? I walk in there and say, honey, I think we're going to have a baby. Really? Cool. And there would have been a lot of excitement. Now, what Job is doing is he is contrasting the news of a pregnancy and how exciting that would be with his perspective now looking back on it. And so that's what he is going to develop in the next section here. They would have been very excited and happy, but Job says, don't do that. Don't celebrate. And don't get all excited that a man-child is going to be born. Don't be excited when you find out you're pregnant, and don't be excited, hey, listen, you know, they come running out and tell the dad, it's a boy. And he would have been all excited. Great, I have an heir. I have, someone to pass on. I have somebody to go fishing with and go hunting with and do all these things with. And Job, looking back on it, says, don't celebrate either of those things. He expounds on the day of his birth in verses 4 and 5 here. Let it be blotted from the calendar, is what he says. Let that day be darkness. Well, you remember the miracle when Joshua was out there fighting the army and they can't get the job done with the time they're given, and so he asked God for something crazy. Can you hold the shadow of the time while we finish the job? We'll be glad to do the hacking and the whacking. We just need more time. So God holds the sun still in the sky, and the shadow of the, sundial, does not move forward. Job, in effect, is saying, I wish it had been the opposite. I wish we could have jumped my birthday. I wish the sun hadn't come up, and I wish the moon didn't go down, and it wasn't a Yom, a Jewish 24-hour time period. I wish it could be blotted from the calendar. Now, here's this whole section is just full of contrast. Because you remember who Job is. He was the greatest man of the East. A distinguished man would have looked forward to his birthday. And a distinguished man like Job would have celebrated his birthday. And all of the folks that worked for him would have been excited because it was the master's birthday. I would imagine they put on a big feast every year for his birthday. And now, instead of looking forward to his birthday and instead of celebrating his birthday, he says, you know what, just leave it off the calendar. Not that that calendar day is empty. It'd be real nice if that calendar day did not exist. And he goes on a little farther, and he pulls God into the argument here. Second part, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let God consider it not necessary in the cycle of time. It's not worth the daylight that shines on it, from Job's perspective. Now you talk about somebody who's struggling, right? It's been raining a lot, and it's been overcast for a while, and sometimes it gets dreary. And in the middle of winter, when we have short days and you have overcast nights, you just can't wait for the sun to pop out and have a shiny day and a bright and cheerful day. It does a lot for your mood, and it does a lot for your vitamin D. Job's saying, it's not worth it. No sense in even having a sunrise. And just leave it. You're going to see he asks for it to be in a little bit an incredibly overcast, cloudy day. He goes so far as to say, let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. In other words, darkness can avenge it and stain it. Remember when God is creating, and God said, let there be light. And there was a division between the day and the night, and time started. And Job is saying, I understand that God is powerful and he created light and day. And I understand that he put those things in motion. And I understand that the natural course of creation is going to be carried out. But man, it would be nice if the night could just avenge the day. When in Jewish history, and I know this probably predates a lot of Jewish history, you had someone murdered, they set up sanctuary cities because if you murdered somebody, the next of kin had the right, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Take your life. And the way to prevent it is that you fled to a sanctuary city so the avenger could not catch you. And the picture here is, some great horrible thing happened on the day of his birth that leads to the days of suffering that Job is dealing with now. And he says, I wish the night would have just rushed in and avenged it and kept it from happening. Cloud here, sit in and obscure the day. And when the day is over, then they can dissipate, and we'll just pretend that there wasn't a day. Blackness, this is the word we associate with an eclipse. Going down in a mine. You can hold your hand up in front of your face, you can't even see anything because there's absolute absence of light. That's the word that he uses here. To terrify it. In other words, he says, I wish, instead of that being a day of celebration for my birthday, that it would be marred as, let the blackness, let the obscurity of the day absolutely that day as a national tragedy type day. I can think of a few in our country. Listen, you can say 9/11 and everybody knows just exactly what you're talking about. There are images that come to your mind and there are things that you think about. And if you say September 11th, people are like, well, it isn't just another day in September. After Pearl Harbor, they said, was it Johnson? Who was it? I don't remember. Let this day live in, he certainly didn't say joy. We remember Pearl Harbor Day. You know what we don't do? We don't do lighting off fireworks and have picnics because it's a tragic day. It was marked by terror. That's what Job is saying about this birthday. Verses 6 through 10, he expands on the night of his conception. He desires for the very root of his existence to be blotted out. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, is what he is saying, and just stop it there. Verse 6, as for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Very similar to the way he described his birthday. Again, it's poetry, and so he is repeating the idea, desire to root this thing out of his existence, and that could happen if we just blot that day off the calendar so it doesn't exist. And then in verse 7, he says, lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice come therein. Parents' joyfulness, the solitariness of it. It'd been really nice if they had just spent the night in solitary and I wouldn't have come into existence, is what he is saying here. And then he's going to go on and he is going to describe this in kind of a tough way. Because he says, lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein, let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. He says it would be better if they were barren and empty like a rock, instead of producing life, because life ended up leading to this situation. Extreme. What measures do you go to at your darkest hour? Verse 8 is extreme. Curse the day. In Job's day, he would have stood out for worshiping the Lord, because back in that pagan culture, there was an awful lot of used to that in Numbers chapter 22. Believe in sorcery. Does he believe in people who are doing desperate things? No, not any more than Elijah did on Mount Carmel, right? You have the prophets of Baal there. Does he think that Baal is real? No. But does he challenge them to call on Baal? And actually, he's making fun of them, themselves into a frenzy. And the whole time, he knows it's not real, right? And then he calls down fire from heaven when God responds. The same type of thing that you have here. Job is not involved in idolatry worship, or he wouldn't be the man of God that God holds him up to be in chapters 1 and 2. But you see an extreme here. I'm not good at cursing the day, is basically what Job's saying. But I know that there are folks out here that involve themselves in that practice, and so let them curse the day. And let them call up Leviathan. Now, there's two different trains of thought here. Some people believe it is referring to of mythology. Folks couldn't explain eclipses, whether it was a solar or lunar, and so Leviathan was a three-headed monster that would jump up and swallow the moon or the sun until a new one came up. Don't ask me how a new one came up. Mythology just doesn't have to make sense, right? Was there a Leviathan that ever swallowed the sun or the moon? It's extreme. It's crazy. Heard it. Why do you let a sleeping dog lie? Same reason you don't poke a bear. You're going to get an upset and angry reaction from them. And Job is saying, well, through the village, if it could prevent the misery that I'm in now. But verses 9 and 10, kind of the conclusion here. Let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark. Let it look for light, but have none. Neither let it see the dawning of the day. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from eyes. hope in vain to exist, is what he's saying. Can Job go back and change the day of his conception or the day? Can he stop the sun from coming up on the day of his birth? Were my mom and dad expecting? Because they'd been better off if it had never happened.